Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, when our founding fathers created and designed our federalist system, they believed that the federal government should not have as much power as the king had, that the power of the federal government would be limited to those powers actually enumerated in the Constitution, and that it would exercise those powers only when authorized by statute. And we can see that they believe that the states should have the power in the drafting of these statutes. And we see right now that our government is not really run that way anymore. None of these elements of their original design actually exists. The Supreme Court has allowed the federal government to control nearly limitless activities. The executive branch acts as its own de facto legislative branch, interpreting statutes through executive actions and agency rulemaking. And it unilaterally gives itself the powers it wishes to exercise. And we've seen this many times when Obama just says, you know something, I'm going to create an executive order, and that's that. I can't deal with Congress, so I'll just do it on my own. That's really called a dictator. So we have two representatives, Bob Bishop and Kathy McMorris Rogers. They introduced the Re-Empowerment of the States Amendment. Now, this proposal would allow 2/3 of the state legislature to repeal any presidential executive order, rule, regulation, other regulatory action, or administrative ruling issued by a department, agency, or instrumentality of the United States. Now, the amendment is meant to restore the checks on the executive branch that exists before the massive expansion of the administrative state. And what they're trying to do is enhance the power of Congress, since it would encourage the president to work with Congress rather than govern by issuing executive orders. Now, do we really need this type of amendment? No, if we follow along with the Constitution, we really don't need these additional laws, these additional amendments, because what we've seen right now is that the government is not following any of the laws. So if you create new laws or new amendments, it doesn't mean they're going to follow them. Most likely they won't, because we're at the end game here. We're at a point in time where the government, it's doing whatever it has to survive. It's doing whatever it has to take control of the entire system. Those individuals that are in government, they don't want to lose their power. They love being in power, and they don't want to lose it. This is why they're taking control. They know the system's coming down. They know we're at the end game here. They know they can't go any further with this. They're going to try to make as much money as they possibly can right now, gain as much control as they possibly can right now, and we can see this is exactly what they're doing. At the same time, they're trying to convince the everyday person that they don't have power. They don't have rights. Just be quiet and do what we want you to do. Well, it's actually the opposite that is true. The people have all the power. The government has none of the power. There's millions of us and a few of them. And we're getting to that point where the people are going to have a choice. Either we take back the country, we get rid of the central bank, we get rid of the government, and we wipe it clean. We start fresh. Because we can see right now, even with these two candidates, Clinton and Trump, running for office, and I know people have heated arguments, with Clinton and Trump, and people want Trump, and people say Clinton's a criminal, and we can see all the evidence coming out with all the leaked emails, and we can see right now most politicians, I would say 99.999% of them, once they get into a very high position, they're dabbling in criminal activity. They're taking bribes. They're doing favors for certain individuals. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing in government, because the only reason they're in government is to work for the people. And we can see right now that at this point, these individuals, they're puppets. They take orders from the central bank, from the shadow government, from the elite, the globalists, whatever you want to call them. They are instructed in what to do. And if they don't follow that order, they're removed. They've done it before in the past. And they will do it again. So, at this point, it doesn't really matter which candidate gets into office. What it really means is, if Clinton gets into office, things will accelerate and things will happen much, much faster. If they actually allow Trump into office, most likely he'll be removed in who knows what way. They'll make it look like an accident. And what we'll see is it will take a longer period of time for the same thing that was going to happen with Clinton in office. So no matter what, they're going to get their way. And what they really want is war. They need to start war to cover up this economic collapse. They need to remove the rights of the people. They need to take control of every aspect of everyone's life. They need to spy on everyone. They need to reduce the population. At this point, unless we have someone in there that's going to go head to head and get Congress to pass legislation to remove the central bank, it won't even matter. The players will stay. Nothing will change. Even though they want it to change, it will not. We see out in Ukraine, things are heating up there. The commander of the Sparta Battalion of the Donetsk People's Republic, Arsen Pavlov, also known as Motorola, he was assassinated by the Ukrainian Special Forces. So we can see right now, out in Ukraine, we're on the edge of war once again. We see in the Middle East, we're on the edge of war. Many people say we're already in war, but we haven't had the Big Bang yet. Most people won't recognize war until the Big Bang and the corporate media announces that we are in war. But we can see we are heading to that time period very, very quickly. And the powers that be, they are not going to give up until they get war. Yes, they might talk peace, they might talk ceasefire, but if you notice, every time they talk about this, it's always when they're on the losing end. They need time to recalculate their moves. They need time to bring in more terrorists into the area. They need time to come up with a new plan. That's the only time they talk about ceasefire and peace. When they have the upper hand, they don't want to hear about peace or ceasefire. Actually, they give ultimatums. You drop your weapons, you surrender, that's peace. And we can see right now, that's what's happening in Yemen, where John Kerry is out there, that he wants an unconditional ceasefire, and most likely what they're going to say is the Houthis must lay down their weapons, they must install the puppet government back into power, and that is the peace process. And if they don't do this, the United States is going to bring in the ground forces and take back Yemen, because right now we can see Saudi Arabia is coming under a lot of fire because they're being looked at. They're hitting the infrastructure. They're killing civilians. They're bombing markets. They're bombing funerals. They're doing all of this right now. And right now, Saudi Arabia was denying that it bombed a funeral, said it wasn't really us, but now they're admitting, yes, it was us. And it was a mistake. And of course, this is what the United States uses, that, oh, it was just all a mistake. Saying it was a result of bad intelligence from their allies inside of Yemen. belonging to the puppet government. So they're blaming this whole thing on the puppet government. But we know this is not a mistake. This was done on purpose. And what happened was they got caught. They got called out on it. The world is looking at them. Just like the world was looking at the United States when they actually bombed Syria. And this is why they had to have some type of distraction in New York and New Jersey. Well, the same thing is happening in Yemen. They got caught. And we can see right now they're backpedaling because the U.S. is about to go into Yemen. And they always start off first with, let's have a ceasefire. Let's have political talks to see if we can work this out. And while we're doing this, in the background, we're building up the troops. We're planning. We're getting ready to go into Yemen. Now, we understand that the United States, they need to get into each and every one of these countries in the Middle East. If they don't, the petrodollar falls. The petrodollar falls. The entire economy comes down. Everyone blames the central bank. Now, we can see that the United States created these false flags to allow them to go into certain countries. Yemen was the latest one where they had the USS Mason out there, and they're saying that a ballistic missile was fired at the ship, but it missed. Then it was fired again. It missed. And then there were reports that it happened the third time, and it missed. And because of their Aegis and their electronic blocking signals and everything else they have on the ship, they were able to counter the missile. Now, they use this as an excuse to fire Tomahawk missiles and to destroy radars systems in Yemen. And we've also learned that the United States government central bankers have been preparing a ground invasion inside of Yemen because they can say we were attacked and we have to go into Yemen right now because we were attacked. That's the only way they can get into Yemen at this point. And we understand right now that John Kerry is calling for peace. And this is what they usually do in the beginning stages to distract everyone for what's really happening behind the scenes. But what's very interesting is that the story is changing about what happened to the USS Mason. The Pentagon is no longer sure that Yemen fired missiles at the ship. They're saying, we're still assessing the situation. So what it's starting to look like to me is that the United States government central bankers got caught. That this wasn't the Houthis. The Houthis completely denied ever firing a ballistic missile. And it looks like right now that the United States government central bankers have been called out on this, and now they're assessing the situation because they need to come up with a response of, were they really fired by the Houthis, or was this another false flag? And with these incredible, computer system tracking systems on the ships, how don't they know? You know why? Because this was a false flag. This was created so the United States government central bankers were able to fire missiles, destroy radar sites, and eventually go into Yemen. And now, once again, their plan is not working out. They're caught in a lie. And we can see that the U.S. government central bankers, they do this very often. And this is why we continually need to point out the lies, the deception of what our government is doing. That's the real purpose of the press. This is why you have freedom of the press. It is to keep the U.S. government, those individuals running our country, in check and make them accountable for what they're doing. This is why the Founding Fathers put that in there as number one: freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And this is what the corporate media was supposed to do. But now the corporate media is part of the government. They take their stories from the government. They believe whatever the government feeds them. They back the government up. So there's no more checks and balances. And then you have the alternative media, where they're looking at everything and questioning every single little thing that the government does, every little thing that these politicians do, because this is what keeps everything in check. And once you lose that, which they were trying to do over many, many years, the government is allowed to do whatever they want. They can convince you of any lie. But as we can see, all of their lies are coming to the surface right now. We understand that there's a huge battle in Iraq where they're telling us that they're going after the Islamic State. This is not why the U.S. has all these troops inside of Iraq. I mean, it's close to about 12 to 14,000 troops in Iraq because they only count the permanent troops. They don't count the temporary troops. And what they're doing there is to maintain control of Iraq, not from the Islamic State. They're controlling it from those individuals inside the country who don't want the puppet government, who do not want the U.S. there. The same thing's happening in each and every one of these countries. And the U.S. is working in Mosul to get the Islamic State out of there. They need those fighters filtered into Syria to maneuver up into Aleppo. That's where they want them to go. Because remember, the United States government central bankers, yes, they talk ceasefire, they talk peace, but they really don't want this. We see Turkey right now. They are expanding their safe zone right now. Turkish forces now control 90 kilometers. That's 55-mile stretch along the border, which extends 12 miles into Syria. And what they want to do is they want to bring it to 45 kilometers inside of Syria, which is what, like another 9 or 10 miles. So we can see right now that they're creating this huge security zone. And they're going to put all the refugees there. The U.S. is going to use this. While the U.S. is in the UN, while the U.S. is trying to figure out a plan to stop what Russia and Syria are doing in Aleppo, they're helping create this entire safe zone. Because what they're doing behind the scenes is bringing in more terrorist fighters to try to hold Aleppo. They're trying to create this safe zone. And eventually what they're going to do is they're going to call it. They're going to say, we have a safe zone, and this is what we propose. Because we can see right now, the United States government central bankers, they're running out of options. And the only options they have left is to create the safe zone, to create bases within the safe zone, make it a launching area for more attacks. Now, the question is, how are they going to turn this around so the U.S. fighters can fight? Because we can see right now the terrorist fighters, they are no match for Syria or Russia. They are going to be eliminated. The United States is going to lose Aleppo. And this is why the U.S. government, and there's many agendas associated with this, where they're having the CIA prep and plan for a cyber attack in Russia. And of course, what we're seeing right now, we have the elections coming up, and they're going to use that to maybe postpone the elections. They're trying to use this where they're going to cyber attack Russia to hopefully start a war. Maybe allow the U.S. to fight against Russia and Syria inside of Syria. Maybe that's where it will start. But then, of course, it's going to spread. But we can see that all of this is being done for one purpose and one purpose only. Not just for the elections, not just to cover up what Hillary has done, but to cover up everything. Because everything is coming to the surface. And we can see the U.S. is trying to provoke Russia a little bit more now. They're thinking about placing more sanctions on Russia. Does that make any sense at this point in time? Russia says we're not even going to counter with sanctions or anything like that. It makes no sense to do this. Sanctions don't work. I mean, the only reason the U.S. has placed sanctions in Syria is to strangle the government in Syria. And that's why we have the refugee crisis, because by strangling the government, by strangling the monetary system, by strangling credit, all these people can't get the supplies, the food. You have war going on, and the United States has created this one gigantic refugee crisis. So when you hear our government officials out there talking about the refugee problem and how we have to take in the refugees, they're the cause of it. Think about this for a second. They've created war in all of these countries. They've created a place where people can't live. They've created an area where there's always a constant war going on. Of course people are going to leave. If people can't get supplies, what reason would you stay? There wouldn't be one. So we can see right now the United States government central bankers, they are backed into a corner. The situation that they're in, the U.S. government, it looks like they're in a no-win situation. And when a government that likes control, that wants to reach their goal, is in a no-win situation, well, guess what? This is when they do other things. This is when they create events. This is when they try to convince you that another country is attacking us. This is when they try to convince you with false flags that all these things are happening. And we can see we're moving into that area where they're going to be creating these events, where they're going to be blaming another country. And they have to make it look pretty bad. Now think about this. The United States is preparing to cyber attack Russia. We don't know when. Most likely it's going to be right before the election. I think that would be the time they would do it, because they would want a response from Russia. Now, if Russia doesn't respond at all, they will respond for Russia. Now, most likely they're going to hit a small town, because normally with a false flag, they don't have to do something really that big, especially with a cyber attack. They can hit a small town and say, that town, the lights went out. Maybe they'll do a couple little towns where it doesn't affect that many people. Russia just did this. They hit those towns. So the United States is going to come back and say, since they did this, we have a bigger cyber attack and we're going to hit Russia. The United States will actually hit Russia. This time, Russia's going to say enough is enough. And most likely, maybe this time, Russia will cyber attack the United States. Now, when they do this, it's not going to be a small little town, or maybe they'll say Russia tried to hit a small town, but they couldn't knock it out, but they'll blame it on Russia. Something like that. But when Russia really cyber attacks, they're not going to be going after a small town. They're going to be going after a big city to send a message. And once that city is hit, and the lights go out, or they hit the financial institution, or both at the same time, the lights will stay out for quite a while. They won't be able to bring the lights back on. The water system will be shut down. The gas system will be shut down. Most likely the financial institutions will not be operational. Maybe Wall Street, if they hit New York City, for instance, won't be operational. But at this point, this is when the real war begins. We can see already that the United States government is trying to silence Julian Assange. They cut his internet out. And we can see they're trying to cover up everything that they have been lying about for years. And we see right now all of it's coming to the surface. And as everything comes to the surface, they're going to become more desperate. As they become more desperate, we're going to see more of this. And most likely, depending on how the elections go, depending on what their information shows them of who's in the lead, how much they can manipulate, we can see, and we need to watch, that they will pull the trigger. And most likely, it will be right before the elections or right during the elections that this does happen. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.